They told me not to talk about what I saw in that basement. They told me, no. They made me sign a paper that said it didn't happen. But you can't erase the smell. You can't erase the way the air felt. Heavy, wet, like the whole place was breathing around me. In October of 2014, in a quiet, rural stretch of western Pennsylvania, a SWAT team raided a rundown warehouse on the edge of town. Official reports called it a possible human trafficking site. But those reports, what little the public saw, left out almost everything that mattered. The truth. 17 people were chained to the walls of a concrete basement. 17 who weren't supposed to be alive at all. Their driver's licenses, social media profiles, even death certificates already marked them as gone, months, years ago. And yet there they were, barefoot, skeletal, their eyes too wide for their faces, blinking against the flashlight beams like animals dragged out of a hole. This wasn't a random trafficking ring. This was curated. Every one of them had something different. Some had extreme physical deformities. Some had conditions so rare they didn't even have proper medical names. Others looked almost normal, until you saw the scars from surgeries that had no medical purpose. And at the center of it, Cornelius Veneer's great-grandson. The last living heir to a name most Pennsylvanians had forgotten, but that my grandfather used to whisper about after too much whiskey, the Millerville Freak Show. Only, in 2014, they didn't call it that. On the internet, it was known as Cabinet of Wonders Live, an invite-only underground performance streamed to a closed network. People paid thousands to watch. And if you think the police just found this by accident, you're wrong. One man, an investigative podcaster named Daniel Rusk, had been chasing whispers about it for 3 years. When I spoke to him, weeks before he vanished, Daniel Rusk didn't stumble into this story. He hunted it. He'd been building a reputation as the guy who went where mainstream journalists wouldn't go. Missing persons the police didn't care about, internet forums that vanished overnight, rumors that felt too strange to be fake. In the summer of 2014, he started hearing about a live stream that wasn't on any public platform. No URLs you could Google, no usernames to search. Access came through encrypted invites, passed hand-to-hand on flash drives or QR codes that expired in 24 hours. And the content? It wasn't porn, it wasn't gore. It was performance. But not the kind you'd buy a ticket for. He showed me screenshots before they disappeared from his laptop. A man with skin so pale it almost glowed, moving like he had no bones. A woman singing in a voice that didn't sound human, her arms ending just below the elbow, sleeves rolled like something out of a Victorian exhibit. A 7-foot-tall figure bending rebar in slow, deliberate arcs while wearing a child's party mask. These weren't actors. They weren't willing. And the setting, a low, wet concrete chamber, looked the same in every clip. Daniel traced the metadata in one of the video files. It didn't give him coordinates, but it gave him a time zone, a hosting route, and, most importantly, a gap. A missing 15-second interval in the data stream. That meant someone had physically unplugged the camera before bringing it back online. A clue so small most people would have ignored it. But Daniel didn't ignore it. He matched it to power fluctuations reported by an electric company in a small Pennsylvania township. And right there in those outage logs was a name, Veneer Properties, LLC. He didn't know the name's history yet. He didn't know it tied back to 1891, to the Opera House basement, and the first 17 performers the family had ever broken into obedience. But he knew he had... Alex didn't talk in a straight line. Her memories came in flashes, like someone had taken a pair of scissors to the film reel of her life and left only the pieces they wanted her to see. She said it started with a fake job offer. She was 24, fresh out of college, working night shifts at a gas station to make rent. Someone approached her online about creative work for an exclusive live performance group. They offered travel, room, and board, $2,000 a week. It sounded absurd, but the emails were professional, The contracts looked legit, and the background checks they claimed to run came back clean. The first night in Pennsylvania, they took her phone, told her it was for security. The second night, they told her she'd failed a health screening and needed to stay on site until they sorted it out. By the third night, she woke up with IV marks on her arms, her belongings gone, and a man she didn't recognize telling her to stop crying. Your family already buried you. She didn't believe him until he showed her a memorial page, a funeral service date, dozens of condolence comments from people she knew, classmates, cousins, co-workers, her parents in black, standing over a closed casket in a photo that looked too perfect to be faked. That's the first break, she said to Daniel, when they make you see that no one's coming, not because they can't, but because they think you're gone. Her driver's license had been marked deceased in state records. Her bank accounts frozen. Her social media scrubbed clean, except for a single post. We will miss you, Alex. And she wasn't the only one. The others told similar stories, in whispers. A boy with severe scoliosis, who'd vanished after a community fundraiser. A woman born without eyelids, who had been in the foster system since birth. A man with hyperelastic skin, who'd been living on the street when they recruited him. Each one had been declared legally dead. The paperwork was perfect. Death certificates signed by real doctors, obituaries in small-town papers, even graves with their names carved into stone. And each one had been given a role in the Cabinet of Wonders Live. They weren't just prisoners. They were intellectual property. They had scripts, costumes, assigned routines. Fail to perform, and the medication changed, either to make you hurt or to make you numb until you forgot how to move at all. Daniel told me this wasn't just exploitation. It was programming. Daniel wasn't the kind of guy to take a witness's word as gospel, especially when that witness was exhausted, malnourished, and clearly traumatized. But there was something about the detail in Alex's story that got under his skin. If she was lying, she was damn good at it. If she was telling the truth, then someone out there was running a real-time freak show for paying customers in 2014. So he tried the most dangerous approach possible. He bought a ticket. The link Alex gave him wasn't a simple URL. It came with a 36-character encrypted key, and the payment portal didn't accept credit cards, only cryptocurrency through an anonymizing exchange. He knew enough about darknet markets to navigate it without tripping alarms, but even so, every click felt like it might trigger a doorbell in some basement across the world. The welcome package arrived in his inbox within minutes. It was sterile. No graphics, no branding, just a time, a link, and a warning. Do not record your screen. Do not attempt to interact with the performers. This is a private experience. When the feed went live, the screen opened to a room Daniel couldn't immediately place. Concrete walls, black paint peeling in thin strips, harsh overhead lights that flickered on a rhythm, long enough to illuminate the figures standing in a semicircle, short enough that their faces seemed to warp in the shadows. At first, it felt like a standard sideshow aesthetic, gaudy costumes, exaggerated makeup, but then Daniel recognized one of them. The man with hyperelastic skin Alex had described was standing dead center, shirtless, his skin pulled taut and clipped to small metal hooks, as if he were a living sculpture. He was breathing heavily, eyes unfocused, as another performer, maybe the woman without eyelids, was led forward to stand beside him. And then Daniel froze, because behind them, against the far wall, chained by the ankle, was a young girl holding a small sign that said, "I am not dead." The chat on the side of the stream lit up with emotes and private betting codes. Viewers were gambling on what act would come next. Daniel's stomach twisted. This wasn't an archive. This wasn't history. It was happening now. And the way they were lit, the way the camera was angled, it wasn't just for entertainment. It was proof of ownership. Daniel forced himself to breathe slow, steady. Every instinct told him to shut the laptop, torch the hard drive, and pretend none of this existed. But then the camera panned, just a fraction, and something in the background snagged his attention. It wasn't the performers this time. It was the wall behind them. In the flicker of the overhead light, he caught a glimpse of graffiti. Not artistic tagging, just a quick spray-painted number, J14. It was the kind of marking contractors used during renovations, or municipal workers used when logging infrastructure. The paint looked fresh. The chat kept scrolling, oblivious. Bets were placed. Cryptic usernames laughed in short bursts of code and slang. But Daniel's focus was locked on that one detail. He screenshotted it. Not the performers, not the girl, just that wall. Then he pulled the frame into his photo editor, cranked the contrast, and isolated the shadows. There it was again, faint but clear, J14, WBC. He didn't know exactly what it meant, but he had a guess. WBC wasn't a performer code, it was a location code. His years digging through crime scene archives had taught him one thing. Criminals rarely hide everything perfectly. They always leave a trace. Daniel minimized the stream and opened a deep mapping database he kept for investigative work. WBC pulled up dozens of results. Companies, streets, shipping codes, but one in particular caught his attention. A derelict warehouse block, officially condemned in 2011, sat less than 3 miles from a river port in New Jersey. Lot number? J14. He didn't even realize his hands were shaking until his mouse slid across the desk. This wasn't some random feed from across the ocean. The cabinet of wonders wasn't hiding in some far-off, unreachable place. It was here. On American soil, in a building city officials swore had been empty for years. When the camera cut to black, a new message flashed across the stream in red text. "Welcome, Daniel. We've been expecting you." For a moment, Daniel just stared at the message, his brain refusing to connect the dots. The rational part of him whispered explanations, glitch, coincidence, maybe even an elaborate ARG. But the pit of his stomach knew better. This wasn't a game. He yanked his Ethernet cable out of the port, slammed the laptop shut, and sat frozen in the dim light of his apartment. Silence. Then, tap. Not at the door, at the window. Daniel's apartment was on the 3rd floor. He turned slowly, pulse pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Outside, through the half-closed blinds, a shadow leaned just enough for him to see the reflection of its mask in the glass. It wasn't a clown mask or anything theatrical. No, this was worse. It was a porcelain half-face, blank except for a single, hand-painted teardrop under the right eye. The shadow tilted its head like it was studying him. Then it was gone. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against every instinct screaming in his head, he answered. A man's voice, calm and deliberate. "You're close, Daniel. Closer than anyone has been since 2014. But you're looking in the wrong place." Static crackled, then another voice, female this time, slid in over the line, almost whispering. "Follow the river. 2 nights from now, midnight. If you survive the welcome, you may see the show in person." The call ended. Daniel sat there, gripping the phone so tightly, his knuckles ached. They knew his name, his apartment, his investigation, and now they were inviting him? Every logical cell in his body told him to run, burn everything, and disappear. But something else, the same obsessive drive that had ruined his last job, his last relationship, told him there was no turning back. Because the Cabinet of Wonders wasn't just streaming horror to an underground audience. They were recruiting, and Daniel had just been drafted into the next act. The night of the meeting, the city felt different, quieter, like it knew something was about to happen. Daniel kept telling himself he wasn't going, that this was insane, that people didn't come back from things like this. And yet, by 11:47 p.m., he was walking the cracked sidewalk along the Monongahela River, the damp winter air clinging to his lungs. He'd chosen dark clothes, a cap pulled low, no phone, just an old-school recorder hidden in his jacket. His boots crunched on frozen dirt as he descended toward the waterline, where a strip of broken warehouses loomed like crooked teeth. At 11:59, a single floodlight snapped on, blinding him for a second. From behind it, a figure stepped forward. The same porcelain mask, the same single teardrop. "Welcome," the figure said. The voice was the woman from the phone, soft, but cutting through the night like glass. "No more names. You're ours until dawn." Two more masked figures emerged from the shadows, flanking him without touching. They smelled faintly of iron and burnt wood. They led him to a small rowboat, tied to a rotting dock. The river water was black, slow-moving, reflecting nothing. He hesitated, glancing back at the city skyline, so close, yet somehow already unreachable. The woman tilted her head. "You get in, or you disappear here." He stepped into the boat. The oars dipped silently, and they glided into the current. Halfway across, Daniel saw it. Faint lights, impossibly deep in the mist. Shapes moving. A Ferris wheel turning with no sound, its cages swinging like pendulums. The smell hit him next. Sweet at first, like candied almonds, but underneath, something else, something foul. The boat scraped against a hidden dock. When Daniel stepped out, the mist swallowed the city completely. Ahead of him, through warped wooden gates, letters spelled out in flickering bulbs. The Cabinet of Wonders, one night only. But above it, in peeling black paint, someone had scrawled something else, half hidden by the gate's hinges. No return. The gates creaked open. The gates shut behind him, with a metallic finality that made his chest tighten. The Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, its lights blinking in an irregular heartbeat. All around him, the air hummed, not with music, but with whispers, as if the mist itself was gossiping about him. A gravel path stretched ahead, lined with stalls draped in crimson velvet. Only a handful of lanterns burned, their light barely cutting through the haze. Shapes moved in the shadows, slow and deliberate, like predators conserving energy. The first stall he passed had no sign, just a curtain of black beads. When he brushed past it, someone, inside, exhaled sharply. A pale hand reached out, dragging a fingernail down his sleeve. The skin was ice cold. He quickened his pace. Further down, a man in a tattered ringmaster's coat stood perfectly still, eyes hidden under the brim of a top hat. He didn't speak. He just tilted his head toward a tent with a striped canopy, the red so deep it looked wet. Against his better judgment, Daniel ducked inside. The air hit him like a wall, hot, heavy, and laced with the stench of rotting fruit. The light came from oil lamps nailed high on wooden posts, their flames straining for oxygen. In the center, a raised circular stage. On it, a woman, or what looked like one. Her proportions were wrong. Too tall, arms too long, head slightly tilted at an unnatural angle. Her mouth stretched into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. The audience sat on the ground, cross-legged, unmoving. Their faces slack, eyes glazed, as if whatever they were watching had shut something off inside them. The woman's gaze locked on Daniel. She spoke without moving her lips. "Do you want to see what you really are?" Something brushed against the back of his neck. He spun, only to realize the tense exit was gone. Daniel's breath came in short bursts. The air was too thick. Every flicker of the oil lamps felt slower than it should be, like time itself was bending to hold him here. The woman on the stage didn't move, yet the shadows around her seemed to slither, stretching across the wooden floor like black roots reaching for him. "Step forward," she whispered, not aloud, but inside his skull. The words were cold, invasive, like fingers sliding into his mind. Daniel tried to tell himself it wasn't real, just an act, some immersive performance art. But when he looked back, the audience was gone. The floor where they'd sat was empty. No, not empty. Indentations in the dust showed where they had been, still cross-legged, but the bodies weren't there, as if they'd simply dissolved into the air. A pressure built in his ears, a low, vibrating hum that felt alive. His knees bent against his will, dragging him toward the stage. He wanted to scream, but his jaw locked, muscles stiff, as if frozen from the inside. The woman's smile widened, revealing teeth too long, too many. Her eyes, black pools with no reflection, studied him like a surgeon, planning the first incision. She raised one elongated hand and touched his forehead. The tent dissolved. He stood in a narrow corridor of damp concrete. Flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell was sharper here, sterile, chemical, mixed with something coppery. At the far end of the hall, glass panels lined the walls. Behind each one, himself. Dozens of Daniels, each a little different. One missing eyes, one with a gaping mouth frozen mid-scream, one curled on the floor, shaking. They stared at him in unison, their movements slightly out of sync, as if reality itself had glitched. "This," the woman's voice hissed from everywhere and nowhere, "is what you are. Pieces, copies, all waiting for the moment they stop pretending." The corridor's lights began to go out one by one, starting from the far end. Each click of darkness came closer. When it reached him, he felt a hand clamp over his mouth from behind. The grip was ice cold, bony, and impossibly strong. Daniel thrashed, kicking against the floor, but his feet found no purchase, only a sudden drop. He fell, not far, just enough to slam into something wet and uneven. His palms sank into it with a sickening squelch. He yanked his hands back and, even in the dimness, could see the faint sheen of crimson coating his skin. The space around him was narrow, claustrophobic. Stone walls wept moisture, the air thick with the stench of rust and rotting meat. Somewhere above, he could still hear the fluorescent lights buzzing, but the sound was muffled now, smothered by earth and something heavier. A single light bulb swung from a frayed cord, illuminating the space in a slow, nauseating rhythm. Each sway revealed more of the walls, and the carvings etched into them. Faces. Not drawn, imprinted, sunken, warped, human faces bulging from the stone as if they had been pressed into it while still alive. Mouths open in silent screams, eyes wet, reflecting the light. Daniel staggered backward, But the wall behind him was no different. A faint shuffle broke the silence. From the farthest corner, a figure emerged. Its proportions were wrong, limbs too long, joints bending at strange angles. It wore a carnival ringmaster's coat, faded and soaked with something dark. A porcelain mask covered its face, painted with a frozen smile. In its hand, it held a crooked cane, mopped with a brass hook. The thing tilted its head, studying Daniel like a prized animal. Then it tapped the cane twice on the ground. The faces in the walls began to whisper. Not words at first, just breaths, sighs, the sound of lungs gasping where lungs shouldn't exist. But then the voices took shape, overlapping into one chilling phrase. He's ready. The masked figure extended the cane, hooking it gently under Daniel's chin. A latch in the floor clicked open, and something began to crawl up from beneath. The floor hatch yawned open like a slow, deliberate mouth. From the darkness below came the sound of fingernails, or claws, dragging against wood. Each scrape was followed by a wet, hollow pop, like joints snapping into place. Daniel's breath came fast and shallow. He wanted to step back, to run, but the masked figure's cane remained under his chin, tilting his head upward in a mockery of obedience. Something pale emerged first, a hand, longer than it should be, the fingers ending in split tips like the prongs of a fork. The skin looked raw, as though it had been flayed and then stitched back together with coarse black thread. It gripped the edge of the hatch, knuckles bulging as though it was straining to pull up far more weight than its body could bear. Then the head rose into view. It was hairless, the scalp marbled with veins that pulsed faintly beneath the skin. Its eyes were large, lidless, and milk-white, darting in unnatural, insect-like motions. The mouth was wrong. It didn't open vertically, but split across its face like a jagged grin that stretched to the ears, revealing teeth not in rows, but in spirals, curling inward into the darkness of its throat. The voices in the walls had grown louder, overlapping until Daniel's skull throbbed. They weren't whispering anymore. They were chanting. His name. Daniel froze. He hadn't told anyone his name. The creature's chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow movements, as if smelling the air. Its gaze locked on him, and it smiled, or whatever that spiral mouth's equivalent of a smile was. The masked figure tapped the cane again. The thing from the hatch lunged, not at Daniel but around him. It circled in an impossibly fast blur, the smell of blood and rot whipping through the air. And then Daniel felt it. Something sharp and wet, brushing against the back of his neck. A low, guttural voice that didn't belong to Hugh, man or animal, breathed into his ear. "You're next in the collection." The hatch slammed shut on its own, and the floor under Daniel's feet began to move. The boards beneath Daniel's shoes shifted, not a creak or a tilt, but a rolling mechanical movement. He staggered, trying to find footing, but it was like standing on a slow, relentless conveyor belt, pulling him toward the center of the room. The masked figure stepped aside, cane tapping the floor like a metronome, letting the mechanism carry its prey. Daniel looked down and realized it wasn't just wood moving. The planks themselves were alive. Grain lines wriggled like worms under the surface, bending in unnatural patterns. Knots in the wood split open into tiny, blinking eyes. They followed him, tracking his every twitch, and when he tried to step away, the boards flexed upward, nudging him back on course. At the far end of the motion, a circular platform began to rise from the floor, a stage. The voices in the walls erupted into applause. The sound wasn't human clapping. It was wet, slapping impacts, like meat hitting marble. The masked figure spoke for the first time, the voice muffled but disturbingly calm. "Every audience needs a performance, Daniel." He felt cold sweat trickle down his spine. The platform's surface was slick, almost oily, reflecting the harsh light above. And then he saw the stains. Dark, rust-red stains, arranged in arcs and splatters. From the ceiling, ropes descended. Not ropes, veins. They pulsed faintly, dripping a clear fluid onto the stage. Something clicked overhead. A series of shutters opened in the darkness beyond the rafters, revealing pale faces pressed against glass. Hundreds of them. Their eyes moved in perfect unison. None blinked. A voice from somewhere unseen called out, in that same low guttural timbre he'd heard at the hatch. "Begin the act." The masked figure handed Daniel an object. It was cold and heavy, an old-fashioned bone saw, its handle carved with symbols that twisted when he looked too long. He didn't want not to know what or who he was supposed to cut. But the crowd beyond the glass leaned forward in anticipation. The chanting started again, and beneath the stage, something big was waking up. The floor beneath Daniel's feet thrummed, low at first, like a distant generator, then sharper, vibrating through his bones. The slick surface quivered, rippling outward in perfect circles. The audience behind the glass leaned in. Their lips moved, but the sound that came through was insectile, chittering, rapid, like mandibles scraping together. Then the first crack appeared. A hairline split ran from Daniel's toes to the far edge of the stage. It pulsed with light, not warm light, but a deep, angry red that seemed to crawl across his skin. The bone saw in his hand twitched. No, not twitched. It moved, as if urging him forward. The masked figure stood at the platform's edge, arms out like a conductor. "Don't resist," they said, but the voice was different now. Layered, male and female, adult and child, all speaking at once. The crack widened. Something pushed from below. At first it looked like a hand, but the fingers were too long, the joints bending in the wrong direction. Veined flesh stretched over exposed bone, each nail ending in a tapered point. The thing's skin shimmered wetly, as if it had been sleeping in something thicker than water. Then another hand, then a head. It wasn't human, not anymore. The skull was elongated, teeth far too numerous, eyes like deep black pits swallowing every reflection. Its jaw opened far too wide, distending with a wet pop. The masked figure knelt beside it, placing one palm gently against the thing's forehead, like a priest giving a blessing. "The role is yours now, Daniel," they whispered. Daniel's knees buckled as a sharp pain lanced through his temples. The faces in the glass slammed their palms against the barrier in unison. The saw in his grip grew warm, almost pulsing with a heartbeat that wasn't his own. And then the thing beneath the stage spoke, directly into his head, bypassing sound entirely. "Cut for me, and I will cut you free." The floor gave way entirely, and Daniel plunged into the red-lit abyss. The drop was shorter than Daniel expected, but the landing was soft in a way that made his stomach twist. It wasn't earth beneath him. It was flesh. The ground shifted with every step, warm and damp, as though he were walking on the inside of something alive. The red light wasn't from lamps now. It pulsed from massive, vein-wrapped columns rising into the darkness above, each one slowly contracting and releasing, like lungs. Shapes moved within the walls, silhouettes of people, hundreds of them, all thrashing in slow motion, mouths open in silent screams. Their faces pressed against the translucent membrane, eyes rolling toward him before sliding back into the pulsing current. A smell hit him, copper and rot, layered with the faint sweetness of something rotting, just past the point of recognition. It was almost intoxicating. The creature that had pulled itself from the stage followed him down, but now he could see its body in full. It wasn't just a performer. It was many performers, fused together in a writhing column of limbs and faces, constantly rearranging. Mouths formed and disappeared across its torso, whispering fragments of lines from plays, nursery rhymes, and old advertisements, as though it had swallowed the memories of everyone who had ever been here. "You see it now," the layered voice said, not from the creature, but from inside his skull. "The performance is not an act. It is the body. We feed it. We let it grow." The masked figure descended the pit's edge on a rope of braided hair, landing gracefully beside him. They gestured toward one of the veined columns. Inside it, he saw a man's face, eyes wide, pupils gone milky. His mouth opened, and Daniel heard it, really heard it, the muffled scream echoing across the chamber. "The audience you saw," the masked figure said, "are the next course. But you will serve." The creature's many arms unfurled, reaching toward him, each hand holding a different tool, saws, scalpels, shears. The air vibrated with a rhythm like a beating heart, and for the first time, Daniel realized it was in perfect time with his own pulse. One thought forced itself into his mind, unbidden. If I cut, I join it. If I refuse, I feed it. And the thing smiled with all its mouths. Daniel's back hit the wall of the pit. The membrane was warm, pliant, like skin stretched over bone, and something beneath it pushed back. Fingers, many fingers tracing his spine through the barrier. The masked figure leaned in so close he could see the stitching where flesh met mask. "This place is not a theater," they whispered. "It is a mouth that learned to pretend." The creature in the center, still reconfiguring itself, reached out with a scalpel-tipped hand, slicing a line into the ground. The floor split open like lips parting, revealing a darkness so deep it seemed to pull at the edges of his vision. From that hole, a sound rose. Not a voice, not music, but a low, resonant murmur, like the earth itself was remembering something it had been forced to forget. Daniel's knees buckled under the weight of it. Images flashed behind his eyes, cities collapsing in fire, oceans pulling away to reveal skeletal ruins, faces he did not know, chanting in languages that vibrated in his ribs. The masked figure spoke again, but this time their voice was older, cracked, inhuman. "Before your cities, before your gods, this place fed. Your kind built temples to it. Your kind sacrificed to it. But the new world made such things impolite. So it learned theater, stories, illusions, and still it fed." Daniel's breath quickened. The warmth in the air wasn't just heat, it was breath. The pit was breathing. The creature leaned forward, scalpel hovering over his chest. "Your hands," it said, each word rippling across every face on its body. "Will make you ours. Refuse, and you will become the stage." The membrane behind him shifted again, and he saw her, his sister, or what was left of her. Her mouth moved soundlessly, eyes rolling toward him, skin pale, veins lit from within like molten wire. His heart pounded in sync with the chamber's rhythm. He could feel the choice crawling into his skull, cut for them, or dissolve into the living set piece. And then, from somewhere deep in the pit, the murmur turned into a single, unmistakable word. Decide. Daniel's lips trembled, but no sound came out. The word, decide, still echoed inside his skull, stretching into something that didn't just mean choice, but carried the weight of it. He glanced at the scalpel in the creature's hand, then at the pale, trembling figure of his sister, pressed against the membrane. Her lips kept moving in silent shapes, over and over, until, between blinks, he finally caught it. Too late. The masked figure stepped back, tilting its head as though watching a puppet realize its strings. You think there is a choice? Oh, Daniel, we cast you before you were born. The walls pulsed, the membrane tightening, and for the first time, Daniel noticed the faces, pushing out from within it, weren't strangers. They were his. Dozens of versions, aged, younger, scarred, eyeless, all Daniel. One of them whispered through the taut skin, "We tried to warn you." The scalpel pressed against his palm, not cutting, just resting there, like it was waiting for him to close his fingers around it. And the moment he did, warmth surged through the handle. Not heat, blood, fresh pulsing blood, running from the instrument into his veins. He gasped, looking down at his other hand, and saw that it was already slick. Not with his blood, not his sister's, but a dark, glittering substance that seemed to swim on his skin. The creature leaned in. The act is not the decision. The decision was when you came here. Daniel dropped the scalpel, but it didn't fall. It sank into the air as though the space itself was fluid. The pit below roared, the darkness expanding outward, swallowing the edges of the chamber. His sister's face broke apart, not in pain, but like paper peeling away from a wall, revealing something vast and formless behind it. It smiled without a mouth. Daniel stumbled back, realizing the awful truth. They didn't bring him here to choose between life and death, action or inaction. They brought him to remember what he had already promised them. The chamber's breath quickened, so did his. And the darkness took a step closer. The memory didn't come like a flash. It came like a flood breaking a dam. Daniel's knees buckled as the chamber dissolved into something far older, far deeper. Not a place he'd been in this life, but somewhere buried in the marrow of his existence. Stone walls pressed in on all sides. Not the sleek, wet membrane of the chamber, but carved granite, etched with spirals and symbols that seemed to crawl when he looked too long. The air was damp, metallic, and thick with the smell of burnt hair. And there he was, another him. Not the Daniel from the mirror, not the one who ran through the forest to escape this nightmare, but a man robed in black and red, head shaved, hands bound by threads of gold. His lips moved in steady rhythm, whispering the same word over and over. A name that was not human. Around him stood the masked figures, exactly as they appeared now. No decay, no distortion, perfect, as though untouched by centuries. Daniel's chest constricted as his past self was handed a small black vial, its surface alive with faintly glowing veins. He uncorked it, tilted his head back, and drank, every drop vanishing into him like it was meant to be there. Then came the voice, not from a mouth, but from inside the bones of the earth. We give you the thread, and you will return to us when the thread is pulled. Daniel's past self nodded once, without hesitation. He wasn't coerced. He wasn't threatened. He wanted this. The stone walls shook, the light bled away, and the granite split apart into thousands of reaching, skeletal hands. They gripped him, dragging him backward into darkness so deep it felt like the bottom of all things. The scene cracked apart, like shattered glass, and Daniel was back in the chamber, gasping. The masked figure was close now, so close he could hear the wet sound of its breathing through the mask. The thread was pulled, Daniel. Hi, his own voice cracked. Why me? Why now? The creature leaned in until its mask brushed his ear. Because you are the last one who still remembers, even if you didn't know you did. The floor split open beneath him, and the darkness roared his name. Daniel did not fall in the way gravity understands. One moment, there was stone under his feet. The next, there was nothing, but not empty air. This was a descent through something far thicker, something that clung to his skin like tar and whispered against his eardrums in a dozen languages. He could feel the masks above watching him disappear, but they did not follow. They simply tilted their heads as if observing a long-awaited event, and then receded from view. The black swallowed him whole. Not sightless black, but a black that was alive. It pulsed in waves, like breathing. Shapes moved just beyond the limit of vision. Shapes that were too wide, too thin, too wrong to exist in the world he knew. And then the sound began. It was faint at first, like a far-off heartbeat. Then more joined it. Dozens, hundreds. The rhythms were not in sync. They collided, formed knots, unraveled, and rebuilt themselves in sickening patterns that made his own pulse stutter. Daniel's body jerked as something brushed his arm. Not a hand, not flesh. It was the sensation of being remembered by something that has never met you. The air thickened, became heavy with the copper bite of old blood and the sweetness of rotting fruit. The darkness pressed close, molding itself around his outline like it was trying to memorize his shape. When the black finally thinned, it wasn't to reveal a floor. It was to reveal an eye. A single lidless eye the size of a room, embedded in a wall of shifting, breathing stone. Its iris was not a color, but an infinite spiral, pulling him toward it. Daniel's thoughts were not his own anymore. Images bled into him. Rituals beneath moons that never existed. Cities built in spirals and drowned in a single night. Oceans filled with bones that were never human. A voice bloomed inside his skull, not the masked voice. Older, hungrier. Your life has been a rehearsal. Now, you remember the script. Daniel felt himself sinking deeper, not into the eye, but through it. The spiral pulled him into a place where the laws he knew no longer applied. And there, he realized the truth. This was not the bottom. This was just the first door. There was no sensation of stepping through. One moment, Daniel was staring into the infinite spiral of that lidless eye. The next, he was standing in a place that could not possibly exist. An endless plain of white ash beneath a sky with no sun, no moon, only a ceiling of slow-moving shadows that occasionally bent low enough to scrape the ground. At first, the silence was perfect. Then it began to shift. He realized it wasn't silence at all. It was the sound of breathing. The ash was not ash. It was a carpet of fine bone dust, and every grain trembled slightly, as if reacting to something deep below. Ahead, a figure waited. It was robed, faceless, but Daniel knew it. Knew it from years before. Not from the archive, not from any nightmare, but from the night of the vial. The memory slammed back into him with surgical clarity. Standing in the hospital stairwell, the small glass vial in his palm, the voice urging him to drink, and when he had, the world had torn for a moment, letting in a sliver of this place before snapping shut. The figure took a step forward, its movement disturbingly fluid, as if it had too many joints in the wrong places. "You carried us," it said. The voice wasn't sound. It bloomed directly in his mind, dragging behind it images of himself walking through his life like a sleepwalker, carrying something inside him that was not entirely human. "You drank the seed," it continued, "and for years we waited for the soil to crack." Daniel's stomach turned as the truth arranged itself in his head. The archive, the masked things, the spiral eye, they were all parts of it. The vial had been the beginning. Everything since had been the slow germination of something ancient inside him. The figure raised a hand, and the bone dust surged upward in a violent wind. From it, shapes began to form, faces he recognized, faces of people he had met and forgotten, each one whispering his name like a prayer. "You will open the second door," the figure said, and before he could speak, the ground split beneath him, and he was falling again, this time into a place where even the concept of falling was wrong. Daniel hit the ground hard, though the ground wasn't solid. It was wet, soaked in something thicker than water, and it pulsed faintly beneath his palms, as if it were alive. The air smelled like copper and rot. He was in a chamber. Not vast, not infinite, intimate. Every wall was lined with shelves, just like the archive. But the books here weren't paper. They were jars, thousands of them, each filled with a swirling dark liquid that moved on its own. As his eyes adjusted, he saw faces in the liquid, mouths opening and closing. The figure from the ash plains stepped in beside him, now towering, its robe brushing the wet floor. "The archive you saw was the first layer," it said, "a place to prepare the mind, to fracture it, to make space." It gestured toward the shelves. "This is the real collection. Every jar, a human life, memory, will, and soul, distilled and stored. Each one, a seed waiting for a vessel." Daniel felt the weight in his chest, the slow, heavy thump of his own heartbeat. "You are our second door," the figure continued. "Through you, the jars will open, and the contents will pour into the waking world. You will carry them, spread them. Cities will dream the same dream, and the dream will feed." The realization struck him like a physical blow. He had never been meant to escape the archive. The entire journey had been downward, deeper into the structure. Every masked face, every impossible corridor, every exit was just another step into the core. And now he was here. The figure reached into the nearest jar, its hand sliding through the glass as if it weren't there, and withdrew something black and writhing. It shoved it into Daniel's chest, and his lungs burned like they were filling with boiling ink. The last thing he saw before his vision went white was the rows of jars rattling violently, their dark contents pressing against the glass, eager, hungry. Somewhere above, in the ordinary world, a man named Daniel collapsed in the middle of a quiet street. When he opened his eyes, they were not his own. The second door had opened, and there would be no closing it.